welcome back to Global Glory Chasers podcast. I'm your host, Dorina Lazo Gilmore-Young, and I am inviting you today on an adventure feasting on the glory of God with us. I host these conversations with artists, chefs, authors, teachers, and others about food, books, and travel, and how those things are informed by our faith. So if you are interested in experiencing the Imago Dei, the image of God in the people and the cultures of the world, these conversations actually were designed for you, to guide you, to inspire you, and hopefully to just urge you to seek God in the world around you. I want to introduce my friend Sunny Zheng-Herb, who is here with us today. She is a Chinese American writer and artist raised in the 626 Asian majority suburb of Southern California. She is a painter and musician, and she teaches high school visual arts in Aurora, Colorado. She also works as the worship and youth director of a small parish church called Sacred Grace Inglewood. Sunny lives with her husband in Denver, where she hikes and bakes and macrames. Her previous writing experience includes gallery publications, grant writing, museum wall text, and a dissertation on Asian American visual politics. She is working on her first book, a memoir on trauma, chronic pain, and the struggle to believe. And I am delighted to have Sunny here with me in the studio today. She and I are both part of a group called Redbud Writers Guild, and she has just recently joined our mentoring program. Sunny, welcome. Share with us a little bit about your season of life.
Hi, Dorina, and everyone listening. So right now I am in between a lot of different things. My husband and I just finished a year of travel, which is really exciting, and we're now in the maybe not as exciting but still important season of trying to get settled back in and to feel a little bit more rooted, both in terms of our physical space and also in terms of our vocation. So I'm in between trying to figure out whether or not I want to stay in education or transition to something a little bit different that's still education adjacent. And as Dorina read, I am currently still leading worship and directing youth at our church, which is very delightful, and it's like a really nice kind of like stabilizing force in our lives. And I am otherwise like enjoying the fall leaves and the crispness of the air in this current time of life.
And I'm sure that is so amazing in Colorado. I spent time in Colorado actually at the beginning of the summer. I'm a California girl through and through, but Colorado is calling me, at least for some
Yeah,
vacations.
yeah. Maybe not like always in the dead of winter when it's like snowing and snowing and snowing, but yeah, it's quite nice.
True story. I would love to
Mhm.
hear, how do you describe your cultural heritage, your mix of ethnicity, any geographical ties you might have, or your families?
Yeah, so I am Chinese American, and I would identify as that or Asian American. And my family, my parents came from China, so they are both from southern China. My mom is from Hangzhou, which is a big city close to Shanghai, and then my dad is from Yunnan province, which is bordering Vietnam. And so they immigrated 30 years ago, and I was born in California. So I am second generation, okay, and grew up in this like confluence of my parents like Chinese cultural values and beliefs, and also someone trying to figure out what does it mean to be Chinese hyphen American. And so there's a lot of like things I think are that are contained within that hyphen, and still like things that I'm trying to figure out in terms of like what kind of family values do I want to carry on and what family values do I like not want to carry on, and so on.
I love that reflection. Yeah, that's definitely something that I also have been exploring. I feel like it's a lifelong journey when
Mm-hmm.
we think about our identity, but I only really started to embrace that I was Asian American when I was in college. And then even more recently, as I've gotten to be more involved in Asian American communities as a leader. And since my family is mixed race, it has its own dynamics. So I
Yeah.
love that you're able to kind of identify that that space in between the hyphen,
Mm-hmm.
it makes a difference. It separates us from the generation before, but it also connects us to that generation before.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about, you grew up in Southern California, but now you're in Colorado. Like, how did that happen? And do you feel rooted in any specific cities?
Yeah, I feel most rooted to my kind of place of upbringing, which was the 626 Asian majority suburb area of LA. For those of you who are not familiar, so the 626 area encompasses many cities such as San Gabriel and Temple City and El Monte and so on. And it's the largest Asian majority suburb in the US, which is a really, really unique experience. So growing up, I think, most of my classmates, I would say 60, 70% were Southeast or East Asian. We all knew our zodiacs. Like this is just a common thing that we talked about in like first and second grade. I grew up in majority Asian or and Hispanic community. And then going to other places in the US, I've realized this is not at all the norm. So I feel particularly rooted to that because I think that formed a lot of what I thought of as normal and what I like grew up with in terms of food, in terms of landscape, like driving through the streets, like business signs were both in Chinese and in English, which is again a very like unique experience for a second generation Chinese American girl. So I feel probably most strongly tied to that place, even though just in terms of traffic and lifestyle, I don't think I could live in LA again. But I like for me, it has a strong sense of like origin and connection. Yeah, I currently live in Colorado. Enjoy the Denver metro area, and I definitely relate to all the other transplants from California and Texas who are coming in because we love the outdoors. It doesn't have the same kind of like draw of origin as Southern California does for me.
Yeah, that's something I noticed when I was traveling in Denver. There
Mhm.
are a lot of transplants there.
Yeah.
And so even that creates a certain dynamic. In your area, is there a lot of Asian Americans or Chinese Americans where you live now?
No. Well, there's many things I could talk about here, but fun fact, there used to be a Chinatown in Denver, but in the 1800s, during the Chinese Exclusion Act and the kind of anti-Chinese like hysteria that broke out, like the Chinatown was actually like completely destroyed by a like white lynching mob, which is like a wild history and incredibly tragic. And so like there's not a large Chinese population here. There are a lot of more recent immigrant and refugee populations. So there are a lot of like Vietnamese American and Korean American communities from diaspora and wars in the 20th century. And I feel like I'm as immersed in Asian American spaces as I was growing up. And that's something I dearly miss. I would say probably like every day of my life here. The recent years, food, like Asian foods have become more popular and like we have a lot more boba places. We have a lot more like Korean, like fun, like cafes and that kind of thing, which is exciting to see. I would say that that's something I miss a lot still. As a transplant in Colorado.
Yeah, well, thank you for being honest and even just kind of giving us a sense of your background. I do believe that whatever city we're living in, it affects the way that we see our identity. And one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you to be on the show is because you went on this amazing trip around the world. And so I imagine as you traveled that there were different facets of your cultural identity that you were considering. And I want to get into that a little bit more. But let's talk about this trip, first of all. How in the world did you decide to go on this trip? And what did you do to select the countries where you and your husband were going?
Yeah, so my husband and I had been talking about living abroad before we got married. It was part of our like dating life conversations around, hey, like, where do you see yourself? Like, are you someone who doesn't want to leave Colorado? Are you someone who like wouldn't live outside of the U.S.? I have had the privilege of being able to like travel and live in other places, and that was something, and it still is something that's important to me. And so it was in some ways a dating prerequisite that I had like put out pretty early on.
Part of the
And
prenups.
yeah. And my husband Samuel was really open to that. I think he had expressed, hey, like I've always wanted to travel, but I've never felt like comfortable doing that on my own. And it didn't feel like it would be just like, it was not drawn to solo traveling the way that I was in my early 20s. And so we had talked about wanting to live abroad. And then our conversation of wanting to live abroad kind of turned into, well, what if we take a year and we like select some countries to visit? And a lot of these countries were actually revisits for me. There were places that I've lived that I've like enjoyed, or like we were visiting like friends or family of mine, and I wanted Samuel to be able to see some of the like the wonders I've been able to enjoy before, but like getting to like bring him back to places that I have loved was like a very special thing. So we basically, in drafting this list of countries, we kind of each threw out like top 5 to 10 like countries that we would like to go to or go back to. Then we decided to focus on Europe and Asia, just because one, there it's a connected landmass and it's much easier to travel across. We have a lot of other places that we wanted to go to in South America and in the continent of Africa, but it just felt it was like in many ways like easier to connect our European countries and Asian countries together in this trip. So
Okay, so name the countries that you actually went to.
okay, it's a long list, so I will name them off. And
Yeah, go
we
for it.
started
I
in
know. That's
Norway.
what I want people to hear.
We started in Norway and we made our way south and east essentially. So the path is Norway, Denmark, Sweden, UK, France, Spain, Albania, and then Nepal. So then we did a longer flight over Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. Then we went back to the US for the holidays, and then we went back to Vietnam, China, to Korea, South Korea, to Japan, and then Singapore, Philippines, Taiwan, and then we went back to North America from there.
It's absolutely unbelievable. I love listening to the list. I've heard you say it a few times,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so beautiful. And okay, I'll just be real. Like in my family, we love to dream. We love to dream of the countries and the places that we can travel. And I remember, especially during the pandemic times with my kids, because we had to cancel a big trip to Europe that we had planned, we just would kind
Mm,
of do that at the dinner table. We'd kind of
yeah.
dream about, okay, well, what if we took a year off? Or would it, what are your top
Mm-hmm.
5 countries? We'd have these conversations all the time. But what I love is that you and your husband made it happen. You did it. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you have this list, it's not just a dream list, but these are actually the places you went, is so inspiring. So I want to get into the nitty gritty a little bit. Like, how in the world did you do this? How did you save for
Mm.
a trip of this magnitude?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in general, a lot of Americans, because of our amount of paid time off, because of us being, away from a lot of other continents, we don't feel like we can very easily plan for a trip, especially a longer trip abroad. I think firstly, like my husband and I are both incredibly privileged and fortunate just financially to be in a place where we could consider that. And I recognize that there are a lot of families like who might not be able to decide on that. Just wanted to recognize that.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of Americans, though, it is a possibility. It's just something that it runs against the cultural grain or norm. So my husband and I, we basically set aside the amount that we anticipated needing for a year of just like life of food and shelter and those kind of things. And when we calculated it out, setting aside, we basically, if you like, I'm happy to share numbers. We basically budgeted like, hey, we're gonna budget like $50,000 for like a year of travel. And when we calculated it out, it actually was cheaper than if we had just stayed in our apartment in Golden, Colorado for a
Wow.
year and paid for all of our other like life expenses, which is
Wow.
also wild. Again, Asia as a place is generally just much cheaper to live in than the US. So that was partly why. And we had money already that we were saving up. We had been saving up for 2 years for this, and so we kind of budgeted out, hey, how much money do we need to like put aside from our incomes every month to be able to like meet this amount and have a little bit left over. It's not like we were spending our life savings for all of this. But and also we in terms of just vocation, we told our work at the beginning of the year before that, hey, like we're going to be here for one more year, but like we are going to be leaving our positions in order to travel, because I don't know of any American company that would be like, yeah, you travel for a year, we'll take you back right away, no worries. In some ways that was like harder to figure out, of like, hey, am I trying to take a sabbatical year and coming back to teaching? Am I going to be saying goodbye like more permanently to my school and that kind of thing? There was both the like job planning piece, and then there was also the financial planning piece, and they were connected. But I think because our jobs involve like part of our relationships, like that felt in some ways harder to like negotiate a little bit, and to say, I know for me it was like really hard to say goodbye to like my colleagues and my students before our travel year.
That's so real. I honestly have had those conversations with my daughters too, as we thought about like, okay, what would it look like for us to travel for a year? And recognizing that there's the magic of going and exploring, but then there also is that sort of tension of like, who do we leave behind, or what jobs do we have to actually say goodbye to? When I was in my 20s, I felt called to move to the country of Haiti. And I remember going to my boss. I was a newspaper reporter at the time. He was our publisher of the newspaper, and telling him, you know, I really feel called to do this. I want to go. And actually I wasn't going for a year. I was just going to go for a few months. And he basically said to me, I'm not going to get in the way of you and God if this is the assignment that God has given you, but I can't change the fact that your job can't be saved. Like basically go, you have our blessing, and you could apply for something when you come back, but we can't save your job. And so I realized, wow, there's a huge risk factor here, you know, and even for my kids, as we talked through, what would it look like if we traveled for a more extensive amount of time? They too were considering like, oh, well, we're leaving our friends behind, or we'll miss this, you know, year of high school. Those are some of the real considerations. And thank you for just kind of even walking us through. This is how much it costs. This is how much we had to save. And here's even some of those personal costs in terms of stepping away from things. I want to get into some of your experiences. And I'm sure this is kind of a hard question, but since you visited so many different countries, were there any that were sort of your favorites that you could tell us about?
My husband and I have asked this question many times, and I now have like a perfect elevator pitch answer. So I would say top three countries were Norway, Nepal, and Thailand. Norway, because like Scandinavia is just a beautiful place, and Norway has these like has like fjords that you're driving through, and you're like doing water crossings all the time. And then you're driving right next to like waterfalls cascading down into the ocean, and it's a very like lovely place. It's very easy for a Western traveler to go to. It was our first country, and for my husband who has rarely been out of the country, it was a very nice like kind of easing into travel. There's not as much kind of cultural or even like physical discomforts that you're needing to negotiate when you're there. All the Norwegians speak English. They'll switch to an American accent when talking to you, and then switch to a British accent when talking to someone from the UK, and so on. And so it was just easy to travel in, and also just beautiful. My husband and I are both really drawn to nature, and so we did a lot of hiking, and just like just going from like mountain hut to mountain hut there, which is so wonderful. Norway, we really loved. We loved Nepal for similar reasons, in that we were able to do the Annapurna circuit, which is, depending on like your itinerary, it's like anywhere from a 2 to like a 10-week long trek that you can do. And we just did like a 3-week portion of it. It brings you through these villages that progress from rainforests up to like all the way up to like alpine tundra level. You're going through these different ecosystems and biomes, and you're also going through these different like small towns and getting to see how locals are living. You live in people's homes, and so it was just it was a really nice like kind of cultural immersion experience. Like it was maybe the longest trek of my life, but it was just a very like beautiful and like incredibly majestic hike. Like the Himalayas are breathtaking in a way that it's like you like feels impossible to capture in words. So
Mhm.
we really love Nepal. And then lastly, Thailand, simply because food and street food culture in Thailand is, in my opinion, like matched. I mean, shout out to Taiwan as a street food culture as well. But like Thailand just has like amazing food. The flavors we particularly loved. I really like spicy things. I really like adding like sour and sweet and spicy all together. And like, we just I think we found ourselves eating every hour and a half. Like truly, it would be we would eat and then we'd come back and be like, oh, now it's the lunch rush. We have to go out and try this new stall. And so I think Thailand was our favorite, just in terms of food, and people were lovely. So yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay, now I'm hungry. That sounds amazing. And I love that you just invited us into those three countries and three
Mm,
very different places
yes.
that landed as your favorites. I want to press in a little bit, and I know you're already kind of describing this and talking about this, but
Mhm.
I know that we share a Christian faith, and this podcast is really about seeing God's glory as we travel, as we eat, as we experience the world. And so, is there anything that you can think of through those cultures that you visited, or even some of the countries maybe that you didn't mention yet, where you felt like, I am seeing the glory of God? I am
Mm.
tasting the glory of God right here.
I think this has come across, and I think it will continue to come across. I think hospitality and food are like primary ways that I experience, I think, just like love, because that is how I was raised in a Chinese home. That's also one of the primary ways that I felt like we saw generosity and hospitality of God in the
Mm.
places and peoples we were able to visit. So, like for instance, when we were in the Philippines, it was like we there was one day, and it was we were with our giant backpacks and sweating buckets because it was like 110 degrees out, and we had just come off a ferry, and we were looking for food, like any food anywhere. We were like very hungry, and we kept going to these different businesses that we thought were open on Google Maps. But again, in many places, like Google Maps is not the most maybe reliable source, or like which businesses are still operating. And so we kept going to these different places. They're like, no, we're closed, like no longer in business, all these things. And we finally came across a home that could look like it was also a part-time, like a like lunch spot. So we just asked, hey, like serving any food? And they said, hey, no, like we're actually having a party for this 1 year old that just had her like infant like baptism, and like we want you to like be part of it, like come in and like enjoy this food. And so they had like this like giant roasted pig head that they're serving, and they had like all these other meats and this like fish dish and like this cake, and they like get cracked open Coca-Cola bottles and were like, you must drink this. This is like part of the party. We were so like humbled by the show of like incredible generosity towards strangers, and just the like, hey, like come in and like be part of this for this like half a day, right, experience. We felt like, oh, this is like what it is like to like show tangibly the love of God through hospitality. Think of like many other ways in which hospitality and food were like ways in which other cultures kind of demonstrated that to us. I'll also say that like getting to go to like different church experiences across the world was also a really like refreshing experience. I think that oftentimes like in the US I get so caught up in like, oh, looking for this one church, like I go to the same service every Sunday, and it's like the same kind of maybe flavor or like set of like we got to go to a Catholic mass in like northern Spain, and we got to go to like charismatic evangelical services in New Zealand, and we got to like converse with like missionaries and underground churches in China. And so just like being able to see like, hey, like more tangibly, like God is at work in all of these different places, with people who share the same faith and yet hold like sometimes vastly different values than us. Like that was really it was really encouraging, and it was really also like a humbling thing of like I'm a small part of this like very much larger story that exists outside of just Western Christianity.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And I love that you had this whole trip where you were going to lots of different places
Mm.
and getting to experience that. it's also one of my favorite things when I travel to visit different churches, and
Hmm.
specifically churches that are different from my own here in Central
Yeah.
California. One of the things I love to talk to my guests about is also books. And I'm wondering if there are any
Mm.
books that you would recommend to travelers or anything that you've read that's inspired you in relation to travel.
Yeah. So I think in travel, something that oftentimes comes up for me, whether it's a shorter trip or a longer trip, is this like tension between home and elsewhere. And I think like oftentimes when I am home, like when I am in uh, Denver, Colorado, I'm envisioning. I love what you said, Dorina, about you and your girls during COVID being like, hey, where can we go? Let's imagine elsewhere essentially, like, and I think elsewhere contains these like really enticing and like wonderful things, yet when we are traveling, like when I am elsewhere, I, especially over a long term, like I miss home, like, right, I'm envisioning home. And so I think that book I would recommend just to kind of, that examines that really well, is called the Desire for Elsewhere by Agnes Chu. She's a Singaporean writer. He has gone to many countries, and it's basically a series of travel vignettes that she's writing about per chapter. Through it all, she ties in this like overall theme of like what is elsewhere and what is the draw of elsewhere. But then also in reading it, I've also thought about, well, like, how does elsewhere inform my understanding of home, in, like, a beautiful way. So
Well, I'm going to have to look for that book. I'm so excited. It's not one that I've heard about before, but I appreciate the recommendation. Do you have any favorite items that you love to have with you when you're traveling? Any little hacks or comforts that you bring along in your bag?
yeah, my so I'm a very light traveler, so I'm happy with like a small backpack of things. Because of that, I really like quick dry items. So I have one set of like quick dry towels, like a larger towel and a smaller face towel set, and it's like tiny. It's like maybe an inch thick, super light, and it like does really well, especially in more humid places. And so I highly recommend that. And I also recommend I know this is like the most common item, but when you're traveling and you need to save something or you need to like patch something up, duct tape and Ziploc bags go a long way. Depends on the type of travel you are as well, but there are a lot of times where like my rain jacket would have like a gash and I was in a place where I could not purchase another jacket, and duct tape really helped me get through that long trek along the Annapurna circuit, for instance. Like, sometimes I want to be like saving like an item where like it was raining, like my I could put my phone in a Ziploc bag, and it was just like an easy way to store things for a moment. So I highly recommend also those two items. And then lastly, I would say that I'm a big tea drinker, and tea like it allows me to create a sense of like cozy comfort in like new and foreign spaces. And so I would recommend like whether it's tea or whether it's like a small like chocolate bar or whatever like weeks of like home to you, I think it's worth carrying around in your travel pack.
I love those answers. And they're not any that people have mentioned before, but the duct tape one is just classic. I remember when we would travel
Mm-hmm.
back and forth to Haiti that we always made sure to have a new roll of
Yeah.
duct tape, and we used it
It's a
so much.
lifesaver.
And
Uh-huh.
the Ziploc bags. That is so
Mm-hmm.
practical, but like so needed, especially when you don't know where you're going to end up. And, maybe there's not a Target on the corner. So thanks for sharing
Mm-hmm.
those. So fun.
Yeah.
Well, Sunny, this has been lovely. I truly could talk to you about these topics for hours. I want to thank you just for pouring into our listeners today and sharing a little bit about your family and your adventures in travel. Thanks for being on the Global Glory Chasers podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun to talk about some of my experiences.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation that we had with Sunny. She is such an inspiration. I loved hearing her descriptions of experiencing God's glory in so many different countries around the world. And I don't know about you, but I feel excited and inspired to pursue some trips in the future, maybe for a little bit longer time after I heard about what she and her husband did on their year-long trip. If you didn't take note of those 3 GGC recommendations that she mentioned, please check out our show notes. So she recommended duct tape, which you could probably get at your local hardware store, but I've also put an Amazon link in the comments for that. Some set of Ziploc bags. I do not leave home without Ziploc bags. Like she mentioned, they are so useful, especially on longer trips. And if you're going to be doing some hiking or some other outdoorsy types of things, really, really helpful. And then the third is an REI co-op towel set that she mentioned. And this is a quick dry towel set. So helpful, especially for longer trips like the one she was mentioning. So all of those are linked in our show notes. I want to share with you an excerpt from the book that Sunny mentioned. It's called The Desire for Elsewhere by Agnes Chu. And here is just a little taste of her writing. She says, "We are born travelers. We travel each and every day. Some of us travel along the pulsating blood vessels of the vicinity in which we live, while others along the pathways that their thoughts lead them, oftentimes entering into invisible worlds displaced from reality. I do not know about you, but I am a traveler of both tendencies. I am both here and elsewhere. I often travel to my past, to distant alternate universes, and to the elusive future. These are voyages fueled by a sense of nostalgia, possibility, and hope. These are places that run on lost time, missed opportunities, and deep rooted aspirations." So, those were words from Agnes Chu, this beautiful book that Sunny mentioned called The Desire for Elsewhere. It might be a good one to pick up for your next plane ride or train ride. And if you have the desire to travel or have done a lot of travel, I would highly recommend this one. Friends, thank you for joining us for season 5, episode 10 of the Global Glory Chasers podcast, which is made possible and ad free by generous supporters like you. So through my Substack, which is my newsletter over on a website called Substack. If you haven't heard of it before, it's an awesome community where you can read a little bit longer form writing on so many different topics. I have a lot of writers that I follow regularly and get their newsletters or read their Substacks. But my Substack is called My Glorygram, and it is a free weekly newsletter. There's also an opportunity for you there to become a paid subscriber. And for my paid subscribers, I give out some of my original recipes and other resources. And this is one of the ways that you can support our podcast and help me keep it ad-free. So hop over to dorinaglorygram.substack.com. And I want you to know we're going to be right back here next Wednesday. We have 2 more episodes of this season, some amazing guests. Let's continue to chase God's glory together.